For the sake of time, I believe Casey and I, the presentations you're going to see are very, very similar. So I won't dwell a lot on the same things that we definitely agree on, but I think there's a few little things in here that we need to discuss, if that's good with y'all. So I want to get to your questions. That's the meat of the road here. Now, they told me there's a button here I should not push. Yeah, I know. So, trying to lighten it, just trying to lighten the room a little bit. Yeah. They seated me when they did that, so if I hit the button, it's them. Roger. So a little agenda of what we want to talk about today, the background, kind of how we got here, the objectives of the project, kind of the life cycle, the simulators. A little different piece in here is the enterprise solution that we came up with, and CRO assessment progression. It's going to be very similar to Casey's and the future plans for our simulators. Okay, there we go. So previous simulator experience with Kongsberg, we had been together since '02, I believe, and I was involved in the first simulator that was built for BP in the Gulf of Mexico, which was Nikika. A lot of serial number 001 out there. So we did that, and we used it for a specific topic, startup of a major asset in the Gulf of Mexico. So I left and went to trotting around the Gulf of Mexico and onshore in different places. We had a project come up. I actually called the front desk of the office, didn't I? You know, these guys still here, and they were there. So just touched a little bit about startup and commissioning, and they weren't maintained adequately after initial startup. We had the organizational design process, and out of that came the need for us to certify our control room operators. We don't use the word certifier anymore. There's a lot of people that really don't like that. We endorse. So we're looking at the operators, assessing their skill level, and then we're giving them an endorsement with that. Sounded great, but could we do it? So the process that we undertook, and I believe I heard in a session earlier, there's a big need in industry to start cross-disciplining your operators, and we've already attacked that in the Gulf of Mexico. We have two people, you know, we've got subsea operations and topsides operations, and we've now consolidated in one, so a CRO is what we call a control room operator, will be a CRO, will be a CRO. They'll be able to run all boards, CRO, subsea, and topsides. We'll be able to provide a quantifiable method of assessment. I've seen Casey speak to that. Kongsberg delivered us with it's Neptune. Well, they changed the name on it again. So I think that's because there's Chevron Neptune or something, and we didn't like that. So anyway, we wanted a quantifiable way to assess our operators. We actually have trainers that are in my organization now that come from the assets, and we didn't want it subjective. The old way of training, when I started this in '02, was an instructor, trainees, you sat back, and it was the opinion or the methods of the instructor based on his training as to how proficient this individual was. So we've taken that out now to eliminate a few behaviors that we were kind of worried about. We'll provide increased skills at our board operator levels. Actually, we've created a different migration path now for our operators. They would come into the board, we call them Tech 1s, 4, 3, 2, 1. There was no level CRO. So now with the simulators, we've created another step that says, okay, you are a CRO. And that means you'll be assessed on both subsea and topsides. So we've given them another way to develop their career. And of course, we have rewarded them for that. Simulation for the entire asset life cycle. I'm going to let, when we get to the question part, Rajesh may address this slide in a little bit more detail. But this is all about just bringing everything together. We all have models that have been developed for subsea. We all have models that are utilized in topsides. And what we do now with the simulation is we bring that together to give it to the operators for operator training or operations training, right? And that's where these great gentlemen come in with their company. So and that's where you see the simulator training cycle. A life cycle simulation, the middle piece here is where we focused our efforts years and years ago, '02. All we wanted to do was start up, I'm going to use Nikika for the example, is the Nikika asset. We started it up, we kept it live, we kept it real, it matched the facility for the first 2 years of operation, then it fell behind. And that's because there was no infrastructure behind it. There was no way of keeping things evergreen in the simulator. But now we've changed our focus area. We're moving more to the online operations monitoring, assessment of operators, real-time data. We're still using it for feasibility studies and so on and so forth, but we're going to use it for the entire life cycle. Enterprise simulation, I believe this may be a little different. I'm just going to cut to the chase. When we started doing this early on, we had a simulator for Nikika. We had a simulator for, let's say, Thunder Horse, and a simulator for Atlantis. And the Nikika simulator spent probably 85% of its time on the road with me in the back seat of my truck, taking it from Robert, Louisiana to Corpus Christi, Texas, to offshore, back somewhere, just to train the operators. So we've come up with a different type of system for integrating all of these. So what you see here is the old way of us building a simulator for all our assets would have resulted in these 4 boxes on this side. We've virtualized all our simulators now. We have one rack in HOLC in Homa with servers where Atlantis, Nikika, Thunder Horse, and Mad Dog all reside. And it has just eliminated the amount of hardware down to where we share hardware now. We're able to share license. We met with Honeywell and have been able to consolidate and give us better utilization of our licenses. So we didn't have to buy licenses for each simulator. They're all virtualized and we can use them one at a time or two. I think we have the capability of 2 simulators at one time. Right? The integrated training environment, I seen Casey had a picture of his. What you didn't see, there's some more pictures coming up, but in the back of that, we talk about MEM training, emergency and management training. Right on the other side of this OTS environment that we've created, where you have the top sides, is where we do our MEM training. So plans in the future are to link that with the operators that are on the board, and then the next step for the future us is more the 3D virtualization, spiral photography, and even taking it out to the deck operators as well. The environment provides us a lot of collaborative opportunities. We bring engineering in there. We've got people coming in to do feasibility studies. The automation techs are in doing CMOS assessments and competency assessment training in there as well. So it provides a great environment for that. Single point of contact. I don't know if Casey spoke to this or not. We now have a single point of contact, which happens to be me, for the Gulf of Mexico simulator program, and I'm sure that is with Casey. And we found out early on that you have to have that to keep these simulators evergreen and keep them going forward, or you're going to lose them. We've tried putting these simulators actually out on each asset, and they just tend to go away. The technicians offshore are on a completely different clock. They've got things that they've got to do. They can't worry and manage the simulator. It's a big project. I believe I touched about this a little bit, right? The optimization of the hardware and the software with the virtualization of the machines. Multiple simulator instances can be started at the same time. So in our environments, we can train, let's say, a Nikika and a Mad Dog at the same time. Or we can bring in and train all the board operators on one asset at the same time. So, and that's based on licensing. If we had 3 licenses, we could bring 3 assets, 4 assets, and you could train all 4 assets differently on asset-specific simulation at the same time. The competency assessment tool. Oop, I went too far. Well, this is the architecture of the simulator, and again, we'll talk about that later. We'll get past that. This is just some of the software, K-Spice, LeaderFlow. We do have an instructor. Instructor Station is, when you see these pictures here in a minute, is not actually in the room with the trainees. We actually have them behind the glass. We have communication with those individuals. Our instructors are role-playing as well, so they're actually the deck operators. So if a board operator needs to open a valve or function a valve, they call by radio into this room, and then they'll make or manipulate the simulator in the instructor station to make that action occur. This is a little bit of Neptune. This is the assessment tool that Kongsberg has provided for us to do the scoring. Now, what we did, we had a generation of operators when we implemented this. You have existing board operators, and you have those that are coming up through the ranks. So we have decided to assess the existing board operators basically to our procedures, right? We have our procedures. They're implemented step by step in Neptune, and these board operators take these procedures, they run them on the simulator, they go through, and then they're assessed. Now, this thing shows a grade at some point here. We had a lot of pushback on, I'm being tested, right? And they were really worried about that. We don't actually use that. We share this information with them, but we tell them that this is an assessment process. We want to identify your gaps. If you have a problem starting up a PAX pump or a generator or whatever, we're going to go back and remediate that with more training on the simulator. This is just giving us a snapshot of where we need to focus some time for you. And this is the procedure that you would see in the assessment scoring tool. All right, that's one of the pictures. This was one of our instructors that's in the background in that separate room. Actually doing an assessment on the operator. When they go through their assessment process, we'll go through training if needed, give them a couple days to get their feet on the ground. We take a week-long training course with each CRO that comes into the environment. After about the second day, they'll get into it. And when they start the actual assessment process, they are in the CRO room or in the control room as they would be offshore. We simulate background noise, we simulate emergency situations, helicopters landing, helicopters taking off, deck operations, the whole bit. It's as close to what they see day in and day out on an offshore facility as we can get it. And that's key, and I think Casey talked about that. Again, the environment as well. The screens mimic exactly what these guys have offshore. These are their operator consoles offshore. There's a little assessment and training going on at the same time there. Kind of our implementation, where we've been. We'll get into a lot of that. Things are going well. We've completed topsides assessments on a couple of our assets and are coming back to remediate those that had gaps, and then we're actually going to start on our second discipline training, where the topsides will begin subsea and subsea will begin topsides. We're trying to increase our bench strength across the Gulf of Mexico. We have high turnover rates and set up for high retirement rates as well coming down the pipe. All our operators are very young. The older ones are leaving, so we're getting them up to speed very quickly. This is our progression, operator progression, that looks probably very similar to Casey's. The Tech 3 that comes in, we have a competency management assurance system called CMOS. So they're going to start on basic technician training, learning the facility, learning the flow paths, understanding a well. They'll go through all that. And as they progress through their career, you'll see right here in Tech 2, we also have a generic simulator that resides at HOLC with us that's very, very basic. It's in a completely different room, not in the asset-specific simulator room. So when they get to the Tech 2, we're going to take them through that basic simulation process. Talk to them about control systems, cascade control systems, basic separation, so on and so forth. Get their foundations down, get them where they need to be, and as they progress, then they'll move on up into the more asset-specific training, which they'll begin as the Tech 1. And then you'll see they'll become not a certified, but an endorsed Tech 1 operator, and then there's another level for CRO. Some of the things that we found that we needed early on when we started the project was the need to have, of course, support from the hubs offshore. And we did that by having a few meetings with area operation managers, and they sent us people to be dedicated to the project. those are the individuals now that have permanent positions as trainers. Those trainers are going to be a year, 18-month jobs, and then they'll rotate out, and then we'll bring in some other CROs to kind of keep that rotation going, right? So we're training the trainer as we go through it. And it's given the guys that are offshore on a 14-14 schedule that have been out there for 10 or 15 years, they can come in for a year to 18 months, get a little bit more experience on the board, take it to a different level, and still train others while they get to stay on the beach and be with their families a little bit more. I believe that's about it with that. Mad Dog, one of our assets, has completely trained all their board operators. They're done. Mad Dog is a dry tree facility, doesn't have any subsea infrastructure, so we've actually developed a subsea curriculum that is separate from the simulator. So they're going through some classroom training as well, and then we have built scenarios to not really assess them on. We just want to give them a hands-on as how it feels to operate a subsea tree and a subsea system on an offshore facility, since they're not on that type of facility. And the rest is just us wrapping up the assessment and training of the other operators on the other assets. One key thing we did do, though, was in keeping the simulators evergreen, is we integrated this with the MOC process. So anytime there's a control system change, a screen change, or anything that happens in the field that can alter or change the simulator, I'm copied on that MOC. They actually have a box to tick now that I get it. I get every one of them. Believe me, I get every one of them. It's this many. And we've come up with a way to prioritize these upgrades. Many of them have already occurred offshore. We're looking at doing quarterly updates. If the asset says this is a critical safety update, we need to get it in there and we need to get the guys through there, we'll update it immediately. We'll bring the CROs in, we'll train them on those changes, and then we'll send them back to the field. Capacity for the future. We're looking at one of our assets. Nakika had some basic simulation with marine. The marine side of our asset, you have the operations, for those of you that don't understand, subsea, topsides, and then you have this huge vessel out there that's floating in the Gulf of Mexico, right? Chained to the bottom. Sometimes it's with rope, don't know. So we want to give these guys that run these, our ballast control officers, BCOs, same training we're giving our topsides guys. So what they do now is they have this huge management system, marine management system, that they look at all the data, and they have the marine operations manual. So if this load is not here, it needs to be here. They have to do all this math and calculations, right? But there's still collision avoidance scenarios that pop up in there, but they can't practice those. There's no way that they can practice that. So we go through drills, and we simulate if we had a collision with one of the supply vessels and it takes out the right front pontoon tank number 2 and how fast it's filling. So it's all just tabletop drills. So the next step for us is to start having simulations built where we can have that BCO in that control room with us and do that same type of training. Automation tech training, we've already started that. We're bringing our automation specialists in from offshore. They're coming in for assessments in CMOS. We ask them the questions, go through our certification process. We bring them into the CRO environment, to the control room environment. They sit down, and they get into the back end of this thing. They get into the ladder logic. They start looking, and they can prove their competency when they sit down in front of this system, right? Also, with our instrument techs, we do loop tuning now. So we've done the classroom loop tuning skills. Now we bring them in to the CRO environment. We develop snapshots. We mess with every controller we can think of and let them tune it. So they get hands-on experience right there on their actual asset, not a generic system. If they're from a Thunder Horse or an Atlantis, they get to do the same thing on Atlantis. And what we're seeing is they're bringing those problems to us when they come in for that training and say, hey, we've got a loop that's been out of tune for four years. I can't fix it. Let's run it. We run it. They fix it, they take those parameters back offshore and go make that change. So, good stuff. Simulator safety system checked out for cause and effects, that's coming up. SIS in the Gulf of Mexico, we're mandated that we have to check all our safety instrumented shutdowns. That's something that's coming at us this year. We have come up with a way now that we can utilize the simulator to do that, to check all the loops. The guys will still have to go offshore and stroke a few valves here and there, but the simulator will provide that for you. Remote access. One of the project mandates that I asked Kongsberg to deliver for us is since we are offshore, the operators have quarterly recertification scenarios that they need to go to. We have a fiber optic network that runs through the Gulf of Mexico that ties all our hubs together. And I asked these guys to put something together where I can have a board operator offshore that he can log in, fire up a simulator in HOMA, go through his recertification assessments, and it'll spit us out a scorecard. Those guys get recertified. So we're in the process. Actually, we're implementing a long process with IT. They're my buddy. But I believe we're at the stages of next week, I believe, of turning that system on. So big step for us. That not only gives us access from our CROs, but it also gives us access from our engineering teams. So those guys can log in as well. They'll be in secure locations within Westlake 4, where they'll be able to go in a back room, log on to a control system screen, just like you've seen in those examples, and do whatever they want to do. Where we at? Flow assurance studies, same old thing. Virtual metering applications, we're looking at that. And all of our future projects, Mad Dog 2, they call it Big Dog now, it's coming down. They will have a simulator that will be built for that project, and then it'll be delivered into our suite after the project. Any kind of changes to any of the facilities. Thunder Horse is going through a major water injection upgrade as we speak now. That is being evaluated on the simulators before it'll be implemented offshore. Okay, lessons learned. Central focus versus asset focus. I talked a little bit about that. You need to have one person that can run and maintain and ensure that these simulators are kept evergreen. We have put that project now in what we call discipline capability, which is our training group, competency assessment group. That's where I reside. So we're managing that now. That all is in our bucket. Support infrastructure is the key. The MOC process is very, very valuable to keeping your simulators updated. They have to look and touch and feel and play the same as they do offshore, or the guys are going to cut out on you. They'll come in and say, that is not the way it works offshore. And you need to get that tuned up as fast as you can back in it. We do want to hear that from them, and then we can get that stuff fixed. Maintenance, we have maintenance contracts with Kongsberg. They'll be our maintenance, of course, they're the ones that provided the service for us, so they'll do all our maintenance, remote and on-site. Getting all the licensing in place was very, very complex. We went through, and Rajesh and I can speak to that more when we get to the questions. We had to we met with Honeywell quite a bit. We wanted to ensure that we were going to utilize these licensing, since it was one of the biggest costs of the whole project, that I didn't have 3 licenses sitting somewhere else not being utilized. So a lot of work was done there with Honeywell, and I want to thank them for doing that, but we've came up with a very, very good solution in that. We have a great working relationship with Kongsberg, ups and downs. It was a big project. We started out this project to build simulators for 7 assets. We divested 3 somewhere in the middle of the project. 2 of those assets we had already started working on and building the models for. So you know how that goes. Now we have to start over, so the project's delayed. So, but a great working relationship with the vendor. Very high level of asset involvement. I think I say every time I do one of these conferences that if you can get the CROs involved very, very early stage and get them excited, this thing takes on a life of itself. They get excited about it, they want it, they see the value in it, and then it just takes off. And I think that's key. Very, very high level of support from the asset early on. And of course, it makes it a lot easier to share best practices. Just some acknowledgements I wanted to put on the screen, but that's it for me. I really want to get to your questions. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it. It's up to you.